Captain Sarah Chun adjusted her worn leather jacket as she stepped off the transport shuttle on his station Omega-7. The massive space station hummed with activity, aliens of every conceivable shape and size moving through the corridors like a living rainbow of scales, fur, and bioluminescent patches. The air recyclers worked overtime to accommodate the various atmospheric needs of dozens of species, creating a cocktail of scents that would have overwhelmed most humans. Sarah had been living in space long enough that it just smelled like home. She pulled her duffel bag over her shoulder and made her way through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares that followed her. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having only made first contact 15 years ago. Most aliens had heard of them by now, but seeing one in person was still enough to turn heads. Sarah had learned to use this to her advantage. The job posting had been specific, seeking experienced animal handler for dangerous specimen containment. High risk, higher pay. Non humans preferred. The last part had made Sarah smirk. In her 12 years as Earth's premier xenobiologist, she had handled everything from Martian sandwolves to the crystalline serpents of Europa. If the galaxy thought humans couldn't handle their dangerous animals, they were in for a surprise. She found the hiring office tucked away in a grimy corner of the station's commercial district. The sign above the door flickered between multiple alien scripts before settling on Standard Galactic, Zephyrian Research Collective. Sarah pushed through the door and immediately noticed the temperature was set several degrees warmer than the main corridors. Her skin began to glisten with perspiration as she approached the reception desk. The receptionist was a tall, insectoid creature with chitinous plates covering most of its body. Her arms worked simultaneously across multiple holographic displays, while compound eyes tracked Sarah's approach. When it spoke, the voice was accompanied by a series of clicking sounds that the universal translator struggled to process. "You are the human applicant?" The creature's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of surprise. "We were not expecting your species to respond to our posting." Sarah set her credentials pad on the desk with a confident thud. "Dr. Sarah Chun, xenobiologist and animal behavioral specialist. I've successfully contained and studied over 300 species of dangerous fauna from across 17 different planets. What exactly do you need handled?" The receptionist's compound eyes seemed to focus on her credentials, then on her face, then back to the credentials. After a moment, it gestured toward a door marked with warning symbols in at least 6 different languages. "Director Vexhai will see you now. I must warn you, human, the specimen we require handled is not like your Earth animals. This is Krothvar the Destroyer, the most feared apex predator in known space. He has killed 17 handlers in the past year alone." Sarah's grin widened. "Sounds like my kind of challenge." The director's office was even warmer, and Sarah realized she was entering an environment designed for cold-blooded species. Director Vexhai was an impressive specimen, easily 8 feet tall, with deep purple scales and eyes that glowed with an inner light. He wore the formal robes of the Zephyrian Research Collective, but Sarah could see the scars on his hands and arms that spoke of hands-on experience with dangerous creatures. "Dr. Chun," he hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air as he spoke. "Your reputation precedes you, though I confess I am surprised to see a human apply for this position. Are you aware of what we are asking?" Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk, noting that it was designed for larger, heavier species than humans. "I'm aware you have a dangerous predator that needs handling. I'm also aware that 17 previous handlers have failed. What I don't know is why you think the 18th will be different." Director Vexhai activated a holographic display that filled the space between them. The image showed a creature that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Krothvar was magnificent in the way that only apex predators could be. Standing nearly 12 feet tall on powerful hind legs, his body was covered in midnight black scales that seemed to absorb light. His arms were long and powerful, ending in claws that looked like they could shred metal. But it was his eyes that captured Sarah's attention, intelligent golden orbs that burned with barely contained fury. "Krothvar belongs to a species we call the Valdorians," Vexhai explained, his voice dropping to an almost reverential whisper. They're the apex predators of the Andromeda sector, capable of hunting in packs or alone. They're intelligence rivals that of most sentient species, but they're driven by predatory instincts that make them incredibly dangerous. Krothvar in particular has earned the title Destroyer through his ability to escape containment and eliminate his handlers. Sarah leaned forward, studying the hologram from every angle. How did you capture him? He allowed himself to be captured, Vexhai said grimly. Our xenobiologists believe he was curious about the smaller species that had been observing his pack. By the time our capture team realized it was a trap, Krothvar had eliminated half of them and allowed himself to be stunned and taken. We believe he wanted to study us as much as we wanted to study him. Smart predator, Sarah murmured, her mind already racing with possibilities. What happened to the previous handlers? Vexhai's scales darkened, a sign of distress in his species. The first 3 attempted to use traditional containment protocols. Krothvar simply waited until they entered his enclosure, then struck. The next 5 tried remote handling techniques, but he learned to anticipate and counter their methods. The most recent group attempted to sedate him permanently, but his metabolism adapts too quickly. He has developed resistance to every chemical compound we have tried. And his escapes? 6 successful breaches of containment in the past year. Each time, he kills whoever is nearby, then simply returns to his cell. We believe he is studying our security systems, learning our weaknesses. The station authorities have threatened to terminate the project if we cannot gain control of the situation. Sarah stood and walked to the window that looked out over the station's docking bays. Ships from dozens of worlds came and went in an endless dance of commerce and diplomacy. Somewhere in this station was a predator that had outsmarted 17 trained handlers, a creature so dangerous that the galaxy's premier research organization was considering giving up on studying it. What makes you think I'll be different? She asked, turning back to face the director. Vexhai's eyes glowed brighter. Honestly, we don't. But humans have a reputation for unconventional thinking. Your species has only been part of the galactic community for 15 years, yet you have already established yourselves as effective problem solvers. Perhaps a fresh perspective is exactly what this situation requires. Sarah grinned, the same expression that had gotten her into trouble on a dozen different worlds. When do I start? The containment facility was located in the station's high-security research wing, accessible only through multiple security checkpoints and authorization protocols. As Sarah followed Vexhai through the maze of corridors, she noticed the increasing number of warning signs and the decreasing number of personnel. By the time they reached Krothvar's containment area, they were the only people in sight. The observation chamber is through here, Vexhai explained, leading her to a reinforced window that looked into a large enclosure. All monitoring is done remotely now. The previous handler insisted on face-to-face interaction, believing he could establish dominance through direct confrontation. Sarah peered through the transparent aluminum barrier and felt her heart rate spike. The enclosure was designed to mimic Krothvar's natural habitat, complete with rocky outcroppings and dark crevices. But the predator himself was nowhere to be seen. Where is he? Before Vexhai could answer, a massive form dropped from the ceiling directly in front of the observation window. Krothvar hung upside down, his powerful claws gripping the ceiling supports as his golden eyes locked onto Sarah's. For a moment, neither moved. Then, slowly, the predator tilted his head in what was unmistakably curiosity. Interesting, Sarah whispered. He's never done that before. Never, Vexhai confirmed, his voice tight with tension. He typically ignores observers or actively threatens them. This is unprecedented. Krothvar released his grip on the ceiling and landed in a crouch that would have been impossible for any Earth predator. His movement was fluid, controlled, and absolutely silent despite his massive size. He approached the observation window and sat back on his haunches, bringing his eyes level with Sarah's. Sarah pressed her palm against the barrier, studying every detail of the magnificent creature before her. His scales weren't actually black, she realized, but the deepest possible blue, so dark they absorbed almost all light. His claws were retractable, currently extended only enough to maintain his grip on the smooth floor. But it was his eyes that held her attention, intelligent and calculating in a way that spoke of sapient thought rather than mere animal cunning. "Hello. Beautiful," she whispered, too quietly for her translator to pick up. Hrothvar's head tilted again, and Sarah could have sworn she saw his pupils dilate slightly. Then, in a move that made Vexhai hiss in alarm, the predator raised one massive hand and pressed it against the barrier directly opposite Sarah's palm. "Impossible, Vexhai." He has never shown anything but aggression toward his handlers. Sarah studied Hrothvar's posture, noting the relaxed set of his shoulders and the way his tail curved around his feet rather than lashing with agitation. That's because they approached him as handlers. They saw a dangerous animal that needed to be controlled. "I see an intelligent being who's been treated like a caged beast. Dr. Chun, I must caution you against anthropomorphizing the creature. Hrothvar is an apex predator, not a misunderstood pet." Sarah turned to look at the director, her eyes blazing with the same intensity that had made her reputation on Earth. "Director Vexhai, with all due respect, every one of your previous handlers failed because they made the same mistake. They tried to dominate a creature that is quite possibly more intelligent than they are. Hrothvar isn't just an apex predator, he's a problem solver. And, right now, the problem he's trying to solve is how to deal with a species that insists on treating him like a wild animal." She turned back to the window, where Hrothvar continued to hold his position. "I'd like to see his previous containment protocols and incident reports. All of them. And I want to know everything you can tell me about Valdorian social structure and communication methods. Dr. Chun, you cannot be seriously considering attempting direct contact with the creature." Sarah's grin returned, wild and confident. "Oh, I'm considering a lot more than that. If Hrothvar is as intelligent as I think he is, then the solution to this problem isn't better containment. It's communication." As if responding to her words, Hrothvar's pupils dilated further, and he pressed harder against the barrier. Sarah noticed that his claws had retracted completely, leaving only the soft pads of his fingertips against the transparent aluminum. "I think he agrees with me," she said softly. "Now, let's see if we can figure out how to talk to the galaxy's most dangerous predator." Behind her, Director Vexhai made a note in his personal journal. Day 1, human handler has achieved unprecedented peaceful contact with Hrothvar. Recommend immediate implementation of new protocols. May the stars preserve us all. 3 days later, Sarah had commandeered a corner of the research lab and turned it into something that looked more like a detective's investigation room than a xenobiology workspace. Holographic displays showed Hrothvar's behavioral patterns, incident reports from failed handlers, and anatomical studies of Valdorian physiology. But what caught the attention of every scientist who passed by was the wall of observations Sarah had compiled about Hrothvar's intelligence. "Look at this pattern," she explained to Vexhai, pointing to a timeline of the predator's escape attempts. Every breach happened exactly 47 hours after a new handler was assigned. He's not escaping randomly. He's giving each handler exactly 2 days to prove they understand him. When they fail, he demonstrates that their security measures are inadequate, then returns to his cell to wait for the next attempt. Vexhai studied the timeline, his scales shifting to a lighter purple as he processed the implications. "You're suggesting that Hrothvar has been testing us." "I'm suggesting that Hrothvar has been trying to communicate with us the only way he knows how," Sarah corrected. "When a predator of his intelligence is contained against his will, he has 2 options: escape permanently or make his captors understand that their approach is fundamentally flawed. Since he keeps returning to his cell, option 2 seems more likely." She pulled up another display showing the aftermath of each escape attempt. Notice that he never kills indiscriminately. Every victim was either directly involved in his containment or posed a threat to his well-being. Security guards who merely observed him were left unharmed. Maintenance workers who entered his space without hostile intent were ignored. He's not a mindless killer. He's a discriminating predator making calculated decisions about threats. But the handlers he killed were not threatening him. Vexai protested. They were following standard protocols for dangerous fauna containment. Sarah's expression grew serious. And that's exactly the problem. Standard protocols assume that the creature being contained is non-sapient. But what if Krothvar views those protocols as a form of psychological torture? What if being treated like a mindless animal is literally driving him to demonstrate his true nature? She activated another hologram showing brain scans of Krothvar during his more peaceful moments. Look at this neural activity. These patterns indicate complex reasoning, emotional regulation, and what Dr. Thorne on Earth would call social anticipation. He's not just thinking about his current situation, he's planning for future interactions. This is the brain pattern of a being capable of forming relationships, not just hunting prey. Vexai was quiet for a long moment, his inner eyelids closing and opening in what Sarah had learned was the Zephyrian equivalent of deep thought. Dr. Chun, what you're suggesting challenges everything we know about Valdorian behavior. They are apex predators from a world where cooperation means temporary alliances for hunting larger prey. The concept of interspecies bonding is revolutionary. Sarah interrupted with a grin. Good. Revolution is what this situation needs. She pulled up a final display showing Krothvar's behavior patterns over the past 3 days since Sarah had begun her observations. Look at his activity levels. Before I arrived, his behavioral patterns showed high stress indicators, excessive pacing, aggressive posturing toward the observation windows, and destructive scratching at the walls. Since I started spending time at the observation chamber, those stress indicators have dropped by 60%. You think your presence is calming him? I think my presence is giving him hope, Sarah said quietly. For the first time in a year, someone is looking at him like he's an intelligent being rather than a monster to be controlled. And he's responding accordingly. Vexai activated his personal communicator and spoke rapidly in his native tongue. After a moment, he turned back to Sarah. I have requested permission from the station commander to implement your proposed protocols. However, I must ask you to understand the risk you are taking. If Krothvar kills you, it will not only end your life, but potentially doom him as well. The station authorities will not tolerate another handler's death. Sarah nodded soberly. I understand the stakes, but I also understand something that the previous handlers didn't. Krothvar doesn't want to kill me. He wants to communicate with me, and I think I know how to let him. The first step in Sarah's plan was surprisingly simple. She moved her observation post inside the containment area, not into Krothvar's enclosure, but into the secure antechamber that previous handlers had used as a staging area for their attempts at direct contact. The chamber was separated from Krothvar's space by a force field that could be deactivated only from the outside, but it allowed for much closer interaction than the distant observation window. When Sarah settled into a chair in the antechamber with a cup of coffee and a data pad, Krothvar's reaction was immediate and intense. He approached the force field barrier and sat down directly across from her, close enough that Sarah could see the individual scales on his face and the way his nostrils flared as he caught her scent. Hello again, beautiful, she said softly, making no sudden movements. I thought it might be nice to sit together for a while. Krothvar tilted his head, and Sarah noticed that his body language was completely different from the threatening postures described in the previous incident reports. His shoulders were relaxed, his claws retracted, and his tail was curled around his feet in what she was beginning to recognize as his version of sitting politely. Sarah opened her data pad and began reading through xenobiological reports, occasionally glancing up to find Krothvar watching her with intense curiosity. After an hour, she began reading aloud, first in Standard Galactic, then in English when she noticed that Krothvar seemed more responsive to the sounds of her native language. This is a report about the mating habits of Centaurian cloud rays, she explained, showing him the holographic display. Apparently, they perform elaborate aerial dances that can last for days. It's quite beautiful, actually. Krothvar leaned forward and Sarah realized he was studying the hologram with the same intensity she had observed in his eyes during their first meeting. When the display showed a particularly complex aerial maneuver, he made a low rumbling sound that the translator couldn't process. "You think it's impressive too?" Sarah asked, pausing the display. The way they moved together like that, trusting their partner to match their movements perfectly. The rumbling sound came again, and this time Sarah noticed that Krothvar's chest was vibrating slightly. It wasn't a growl or a threat display. It was something she had never heard described in any of the incident reports. "Are you purring?" she asked in amazement. Krothvar's golden eyes met hers, and slowly, deliberately, he nodded. Sarah nearly dropped her data pad. "Oh my God, you understand me. You actually understand what I'm saying." Another nod, this time accompanied by what Sarah could only describe as a smile. It was subtle, just a slight curve at the corners of his mouth, but it transformed his entire appearance from fearsome predator to something much more complex. "How long have you been able to understand Standard Galactic?" she asked. Krothvar held up one massive hand and spread his fingers wide, then repeated the gesture twice more. 15, Sarah guessed. "Days? Weeks?" Krothvar shook his head and pointed toward the observation window, then held up his hands again in the same configuration. 15 handlers, Sarah whispered. "You've understood everything for the entire year you've been here." The expression that crossed Krothvar's face was unmistakably one of frustration and sadness. He lowered his head and made a sound that was somewhere between a whine and a sigh. Sarah felt her heart break a little. "They never gave you a chance to show them, did they? They saw your size and your claws and decided you were just a dangerous animal." Krothvar's head snapped up, and he nodded vigorously. Then he stood and moved to the back wall of his enclosure, where Sarah noticed deep scratches in the metal that she had previously assumed were signs of aggressive behavior. But as Krothvar traced the scratches with one claw, Sarah realized they weren't random marks of frustration. They were symbols, carefully carved and arranged in distinct patterns. "Vex High," she called to the observation chamber, knowing the director was monitoring her session. "I need you to run an analysis on those wall markings. I think Krothvar has been trying to write to us." The analysis took 3 hours and required consultation with xenolinguistic experts from across the galaxy. When the results came back, the entire research team gathered in the observation chamber to hear Vex High's report. The markings appear to be a hybrid communication system combining Valdorian territorial markers with symbols derived from Standard Galactic, Vex High announced, his voice tight with excitement. "The translation is incomplete, but the primary message appears to be, I am Krothvar of the Bone Valley Pack. I seek to understand the small claws who watch from afar. Why do you fear one who offers no threat to your young?" Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "He's been trying to introduce himself. For an entire year, he's been trying to tell us who he is and ask why we're treating him like a monster." "There's more," Vex High continued. "The markings include what appear to be questions about galactic society, star charts, and this is particularly interesting, inquiries about the social structure of humans." "He's been asking about me?" Sarah asked. "For the past 3 days, yes." The most recent additions to his wall markings translate roughly to, "The small claw with yellow head fur shows no fear scent." Does she understand that Krothvar means no harm to pack friends? Sarah stood and walked to the force field barrier, where Krothvar was waiting with what she now recognized as hopeful anticipation. "I understand, Krothvar," she said clearly, "and I want to be pack friends with you." The transformation in Krothvar's posture was immediate and dramatic. His entire body language shifted from cautious hope to something approaching joy. He approached the barrier and placed both hands against it, then threw back his head and let out a sound that made the entire station vibrate. It wasn't a roar of challenge or a howl of aggression. It was a song, deep and complex and hauntingly beautiful. Other research staff throughout the station stopped their work to listen as Krothvar sang what Sarah somehow knew was a song of welcome, a Valdorian greeting extended to a new pack member. When the song ended, Krothvar looked directly at Sarah and spoke in carefully pronounced Standard Galactic, his voice deep and resonant but unmistakably intelligent. "Pack friend Sarah," he said slowly, tasting each word. "Will you run with Krothvar?" Sarah pressed her hands against the barrier, matching his gesture. "I thought you'd never ask." Behind her, Vexhai made another note in his journal. Day 4. Krothvar has revealed sapient intelligence and linguistic capability. Dr. Chun has achieved peaceful first contact with the galaxy's most dangerous predator. Request immediate recategorization of subject from dangerous fauna to sentient being. This changes everything. The galactic news feeds exploded within hours of Vexhai's official report. First sentient contact with apex predator species. Human researcher achieves breakthrough with galaxy's most dangerous creature. Valdorian intelligence confirmed after year of failed studies. Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm that reached across dozens of star systems. But she ignored the attention, focusing instead on the remarkable being who sat across from her in what was no longer called a containment cell, but had been hastily redesignated as a diplomatic suite. The force field remained active for safety protocols, but the entire dynamic of the situation had shifted overnight. "Tell me about your pack, Krothvar," Sarah said as she settled into her usual chair with her morning coffee. Over the past week, their daily conversations had become a highlight that both of them looked forward to. Krothvar stretched his powerful frame and settled into his preferred sitting position, which Sarah had learned was actually a formal posture used by Valdorians when sharing stories with honored guests. Bone Valley Pack was strong. He began his Standard Galactic, improving daily as he practiced with Sarah. 17 hunters, 43 younglings, 11 elders. We controlled territory from the Crystal Falls to the Singing Mountains. His voice carried a note of pride that was unmistakably genuine. "Was?" Sarah asked gently, noting his use of past tense. Krothvar's expression darkened, and his claws extended slightly before he consciously retracted them. "The Sky Metal Hunters came. Your people call them Hegemony Fleet. They said our world had valuable minerals. They said we were dangerous fauna that needed relocation." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Hegemony was a loose confederation of mining corporations that had gained too much political power in the Outer Rim sectors. They were notorious for displacing indigenous species from resource-rich worlds, usually with the tacit approval of galactic authorities who preferred to classify inconvenient intelligent species as non-sentient fauna. "What happened to your pack?" she asked quietly. "The younglings and elders were taken to preservation facilities," Krothvar said, making air quotes with his massive claws in a gesture he had learned from watching Sarah. "The hunters who resisted were killed. I was captured because I allowed myself to be captured." "You wanted to be taken?" Krothvar nodded solemnly. "The Sky Metal Hunters had technology we could not fight, but they also had curiosity about us. I thought if I could make them understand that we are people, not beasts, they might return my pack to our hunting grounds." Sarah felt anger building in her chest, the same protective fury that had driven her to become an advocate for Earth's endangered species. "How long have you been working to prove your intelligence?" "Since I first learned your star-speak languages," Krothvar replied. "I thought if I could communicate with the small claws, they would see that Krothvar is not a mindless predator." But the handlers only saw what they expected to see. "A dangerous animal that needed to be controlled," Sarah finished. "Yes. So I showed them what happens when an intelligent predator is treated like mindless beast. I escaped when they were cruel. I killed only those who threatened harm. I hoped they would understand the difference." Sarah stood and began pacing, her mind racing. "Krothvar, those previous handlers weren't just trying to study you. They were probably evaluating your intelligence level for the Hegemony's reports. If they could prove you were non-sentient, it would justify keeping your pack in those preservation facilities indefinitely." Krothvar's eyes flashed with golden fire. "You think the small claws wanted to find me stupid?" "I think some of them did, yes. Not Vexhai and his team, but whoever hired them might have had very specific expectations about the results of this study." Before Krothvar could respond, An alarm began blaring throughout the research facility. Red warning lights bathed the corridors as an automated voice announced in multiple languages. Attention, all personnel. Hegemony fleet vessels are requesting permission to dock. All research activities are to be suspended pending arrival of corporate oversight team. Sarah and Krothvar locked eyes through the force field, both understanding immediately that their time for peaceful dialogue might be about to end. Sarah, Krothvar said urgently, "If the Sky Metal Hunters take me back, they will say this study proved I am only clever beast. My pack will never be freed." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Vexi has already filed the sentience report. It's in the official records. Records can be changed. Studies can be reinterpreted. Krothvar stood and moved to his wall of markings, tracing new symbols with his claw. But if I am free when they arrive, if I am choosing to work with you instead of being contained by you, that would be much harder to explain away, Sarah finished. She activated her communicator. Vexi, I need to speak with you immediately. And bring the override codes for the containment system. Dr. Chun, what are you planning? I'm planning to give Krothvar the chance to prove his intelligence to the galaxy in a way that no one can ignore or reinterpret. 20 minutes later, Vexi stood before the containment controls with his hands hovering over the deactivation sequence. Dr. Chun, I must remind you that if Krothvar harms anyone once he is released, the responsibility will fall on both of us. And I must remind you that keeping a sentient being imprisoned against his will is a violation of the Galactic Rights Accord, Sarah replied firmly. Krothvar has demonstrated intelligence, communication ability, and peaceful intent. Continued containment would be legally classified as wrongful imprisonment. Through the force field, Krothvar watched the proceedings with calm alertness. Director Vexi, he said in his carefully pronounced Standard Galactic, Krothvar gives word of honor that no harm will come to Pack Friends while I am free. I ask only for chance to stand as equal, not as caged beast. Vexi's scales flickered through several colors as he processed the implications. Finally, he entered the deactivation sequence. May the stars preserve us all, he muttered. The force field shimmered and disappeared. For the first time in over a year, Krothvar was free. The massive predator stepped slowly into the antechamber, his movements careful and deliberate. Sarah remained seated, showing no fear despite the fact that Krothvar could have torn her apart in seconds. Instead, he approached her chair and, in a gesture that would have been impossible to explain under the previous dangerous fauna classification, knelt down so that his eyes were level with hers. Pack friend Sarah, he said solemnly, Krothvar is in your debt. You saw a person where others saw only monster. Sarah reached out slowly and placed her hand on his massive forearm. His scales were warm and surprisingly smooth like polished stone. Friends don't owe each other debts, Krothvar. They just help each other. A new voice interrupted the moment, speaking Standard Galactic with the clipped, authoritative tone of corporate management. How touching. Though I'm afraid this little experiment is about to come to an end. Sarah turned to see three figures in Hegemony Fleet uniforms standing in the doorway. The leader, a tall humanoid with the pale blue skin of the Centaurian species, carried himself with the arrogance of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation. I am Commander Theclon of the Hegemony Mining Authority, he announced. We are here to reclaim our property and review the completely inappropriate classification changes that have been made to this facility's reports. Krothvar rose to his full height, towering over everyone in the room. But instead of the aggressive posture Sarah might have expected, he moved to stand beside her chair in what was clearly a protective position. Commander, Sarah said evenly, you're looking at a sentient being who has been wrongfully imprisoned for over a year. This isn't property reclamation, it's potential kidnapping. Dr. Chun, I presume? Theclon's voice carried dismissive amusement. We've read your reports. Very creative interpretation of standard animal behavioral patterns. However, the Hegemony has several expert xenobiologists who will be conducting a proper evaluation of the specimen's intelligence level. The specimen has a name, Krothvar said, his voice carrying the dangerous edge that had terrified previous handlers. and the specimen can speak for himself. Commander Theclon's expression shifted to surprise, then calculation. Impressive vocal mimicry. The previous reports mentioned the creature's ability to repeat sounds, but this level of articulation is remarkable. It's not mimicry, Sarah said, standing to face the commander. It's communication. Krothvar understands everything you're saying, and he's been composing written messages in a hybrid language system that combines his native script with Standard Galactic. Written messages? Theclon laughed. Dr. Chun, you're attributing far too much intelligence to what are clearly territorial markings and coincidental scratches. Krothvar moved to his wall of markings and began tracing specific symbols with his claw while speaking. Commander Theclon of Hegemony Mining Authority came to Bone Valley 3 cycles ago with promises of peaceful cooperation. When Pack refused to abandon hunting grounds, he ordered attack ships to destroy our sacred sites and capture our people. The room fell silent. Theclon's expression had shifted from amusement to something approaching alarm. How could he possibly know? The commander began, then stopped himself. Because he was there, Sarah said quietly. Because he watched your people destroy his home and capture his family. And because he's been waiting over a year for someone to listen to his side of the story. Krothvar continued speaking, his voice carrying the formal cadence of someone delivering testimony. Hegemony forces killed 17 of our hunters who tried to protect the younglings. They used neural inhibitors to capture the survivors. They told galactic authorities that Valdorians were non-sentient predators who posed a threat to mining operations. This is impossible, Theclon said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. The intelligence assessments clearly showed. The intelligence assessments showed what you wanted them to show. Vexhai interrupted, finally finding his voice. Because you needed to justify treating an entire sentient species as disposable obstacles to your mining operation. Krothvar took a step toward Commander Theclon, and Sarah saw several emotions war across the Predator's face. Anger, grief, and something that might have been hope. Commander, he said quietly, where is my pack? Commander Theclon's silence stretched uncomfortably long. Sarah watched as the Hegemony officer's confident facade crumbled under Krothvar's direct question and the weight of everyone's stare. Finally, he activated his personal communicator and spoke in rapid, hushed tones in what Sarah recognized as Centaurian military code. The preservation facilities are classified information, Theclon said finally. I'm not authorized to discuss the disposition of relocated fauna with unauthorized personnel. Fauna? Krothvar's voice dropped to a growl that made the walls vibrate. You still call my people fauna? Sarah stepped between Krothvar and the commander, not to protect Theclon, but to keep Krothvar from doing something that would undermine everything they had accomplished. Krothvar, she said quietly, placing her hand on his arm. This is exactly what they want. They want you to lose control, to prove their point that you're just a dangerous animal. Krothvar's golden eyes met hers, and she saw him make a visible effort to rein in his anger. You are right, pack friend. But hearing him speak of my younglings as things to be stored away. I know, Sarah said. But we're going to get them back. All of them. She turned to face Commander Theclon with an expression that had intimidated corporate executives across 3-star systems. Commander, you have a problem. A big one. In approximately 6 hours, every major news network in the galaxy is going to broadcast footage of Krothvar demonstrating clear sentience. The Galactic Rights Tribunal is going to want to know why the Hegemony has been holding an entire population of sentient beings in preservation facilities for over a year. Dr. Chun, you're making assumptions about legal classifications that are far beyond your expertise. Actually, I'm not. Sarah activated her own communicator and displayed an official seal that made Theclon's eyes widen. I'm also a certified Xenolaw advocate with the authority to file formal complaints with the Rights Tribunal. And as of 1 hour ago, I filed a class action suit against the Hegemony Mining Authority on behalf of the entire Valdorian species. Theclon's pale blue skin seemed to grow even paler. You can't do that. You don't have standing to represent an alien species. I do if that species formally requests my representation, Sarah replied. She looked at Krothvar. Which brings me to a question I need to ask you officially. Krothvar of the Bone Valley Pack, do you request that I serve as legal advocate for your people in proceedings against the Hegemony Mining Authority? Krothvar straightened to his full height and spoke with the formal dignity of someone who understood the weight of the moment. I, Krothvar, last free hunter of the Bone Valley Pack, do formally request that Pack Friend Sarachin serve as voice speaker for all Valdorian people in Starcore proceedings. I give this request with full knowledge of its meaning and consequences. Request accepted and logged, Sarah said, her communicator recording every word. Commander Theclon, you now have exactly 1 hour to produce the current location and status of all Valdorian individuals currently held in hegemony facilities. Failure to comply will result in additional charges of obstruction of justice and violation of sentient rights. The commander was speaking rapidly into his communicator again, but Sarah could see that he was losing ground in whatever argument he was having with his superiors. After several minutes, he ended the call and turned back to face them with the expression of someone who had just received very bad news. The Hegemony Mining Authority is prepared to negotiate a resolution to this situation, he said carefully. No negotiations, Krothvar said firmly. Return my pack to Bone Valley. Remove your mining equipment from our hunting grounds. Pay compensation for the hunters you killed and the sacred sites you destroyed. That's completely unreasonable. The mining rights were legally purchased. From whom? Sarah interrupted. Who exactly did you purchase them from? Because I'm fairly certain the Valdorians didn't sign any contracts selling their homeworld. Theclon's silence was answer enough. Sarah had seen this pattern before on Earth, when corporations claimed ownership of lands occupied by indigenous peoples. The legal framework was always the same. Declare the inhabitants non-sentient, claim the territory as unclaimed resources, and let bureaucratic momentum handle the rest. Here's what's going to happen, Sarah continued. You're going to provide immediate transport for me and Krothvar to visit these preservation facilities. We're going to verify the condition and treatment of his people. And then we're going to work out a timeline for returning them to their homeworld with full recognition of their territorial rights. And if we refuse, Sarah smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Then I released the footage of Krothvar's intelligence demonstration to every news network in the galaxy, along with detailed documentation of the hegemony's classification fraud. Your stock price will crater within hours, and the Rights Tribunal will freeze all your mining operations pending a full investigation. You're bluffing. You don't have that kind of influence. Commander, Vexai spoke up quietly. You might want to research Dr. Chen's previous work on Earth. She successfully led the campaign that resulted in enhanced rights protections for 17 species and forced the restructuring of 3 major agricultural corporations. Her advocacy work helped establish the current galactic standards for sentient species identification. Sarah watched as Theclon's expression shifted from skepticism to concern to resignation. I'll need to contact my superiors. You have 30 minutes, Sarah said. After that, I start making calls to the media networks. As Theclon left to make his calls, Sarah turned to find Krothvar watching her with something approaching awe. Pack friend Sarah, he said quietly, you fight with words the way Valdorian hunters fight with claws and teeth. It is magnificent. Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the station's elevated temperature. We're pack friends, Krothvar. That means we protect each other. 3 hours later, Sarah found herself aboard a hegemony transport ship heading toward the Kepler 442 system. The ship was designed for cargo transport rather than passenger comfort, but she barely noticed the cramped quarters. Her attention was focused entirely on Krothvar, who sat beside her in specially reinforced seating, staring out the viewport at the stars streaming past. He hadn't spoken much since they left the station. Sarah could see the tension in his posture, the way his claws kept extending and retracting as he processed the reality that he was finally going to see his pack again. Tell me about the younglings, she said softly. What are they like? Hrothvar's expression softened immediately. Valdorian young are born curious about everything. They ask endless questions, explore every shadow, taste every new scent. The smallest of my pack was called Whispertail because she was so quiet you could barely hear her move, but she would follow the adults everywhere, learning by watching. How old was she when you were captured? 4 seasons. Still too young for her first hunt, but old enough to understand that something terrible had happened. Hrothvar's voice carried a note of pain that made Sarah's heart ache. The adults we could explain things to, help them understand why we had to submit to capture. But the younglings, they just knew their world had become frightening, and their protectors couldn't protect them. Sarah reached over and placed her hand on his massive forearm. We're going to get them back, Hrothvar. All of them. And if the Sky Metal hunters have harmed them. The question hung in the air between them. Sarah had seen enough corporate preservation facilities to know that they were often little better than warehouses for beings considered inconvenient obstacles to profit. The fact that the hegemony had classified the Valdorians as non-sentient meant their treatment would likely fall well below even basic animal welfare standards. If they've been harmed, Sarah said quietly, then we make sure it never happens again, to them or to anyone else. Commander Theclon emerged from the ship's communication center with the expression of someone who had just received a series of increasingly unpleasant orders from his superiors. Dr. Chun, I've been instructed to inform you that the hegemony is prepared to discuss a comprehensive settlement regarding the Valdorian situation. Good, Sarah said. What are the terms? Relocation of the Valdorian population to a suitable reserve world, financial compensation for inconvenience caused, and recognition of their status as a protected species under galactic conservation laws. Hrothvar's rumbling growl filled the cargo hold. Protected species? Like animals in a zoo. It's better than their current classification, Theclon said defensively. No, Sarah said firmly. It's not good enough. The Valdorians aren't a conservation project. They're a sovereign people. They get full sentient rights, return to their homeworld, and control over their own territory. That's impossible. The mining operation on Bone Valley has already extracted significant resources. The environmental impact can be remediated, Sarah interrupted, and will be at hegemony expense as part of the settlement. The cost would be astronomical. Sarah activated her communicator and displayed a holographic document. Then, perhaps you shouldn't have built your business model on stealing homeworlds from sentient species. Because according to galactic law, that's exactly what you did. She stood and moved to the viewport where Hrothvar was watching the stars. In the distance, she could see a small, blue-green planet growing larger as they approached. Is that? She began. Kepler, 442b, Theclon confirmed. The facility is located on the northern continent. Hrothvar pressed his face against the viewport, and Sarah saw his nostrils flare as if he could somehow catch the scent of his people across the vacuum of space. They are here, he whispered. I can feel it. Sarah placed her hand on his shoulder. We're going to bring them home, Hrothvar. All of them. As their ship entered the planet's atmosphere, Sarah caught her first glimpse of what the hegemony called a preservation facility. It looked exactly like what it was, a prison designed to hold beings whose only crime was living on land that corporations wanted to exploit. But that was about to change. Sarah Chun had never met a cage she couldn't open or a bureaucracy she couldn't outfight. And now she had a partner who was quite literally the most dangerous predator in the galaxy. The Hegemony Mining Authority was about to learn what happened when you made the mistake of caging a human's friends. The Hegemony Preservation Facility on Kepler 442b was worse than Sarah had imagined, and she had seen some terrible places in her career. Row upon row of sterile containment units stretched across a barren plateau, each one designed to hold what the facility management still insisted on calling relocated fauna specimens. But it was the sound that hit Sarah first. As their transport landed near the main administrative complex, she could hear it through the ship's hull, a low, mournful wailing that seemed to come from dozens of throats at once. Beside her, Krothvar went completely rigid. "Pack song," he whispered, his voice breaking. "They're singing the song of the lost pack." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. She had heard similar sounds before, from Earth's great whales when their pods were separated by human activity. It was the sound of social creatures calling for family members who might never answer. "Commander Theclon," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "How long have they been making that sound?" The commander refused to meet her eyes. "The specimens have been vocal since their arrival. The facility staff believes it's a form of territorial marking behavior." "It's a mourning song," Krothvar said, his claws extending involuntarily. "They think I am dead. They think their last free hunter failed to save them." Sarah stood and moved to the transport's exit ramp. "Open it. Now." "Dr. Chun, I must advise that direct contact with the specimens without proper containment protocols. They're not specimens, they're people, and I'm ordering you to open this ramp right now, or I'll open it myself." Sarah's hand moved to the emergency release, and Theclon quickly activated the normal opening sequence. The moment the ramp lowered, Krothvar threw back his head and let out a roar that shook the entire transport. It wasn't the aggressive challenge Sarah had heard during his captivity on the station. This was something primal and joyful, a hunting call that carried across the facility like thunder. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The mournful wailing stopped abruptly, replaced by answering roars from dozens of voices. Sarah could see movement in the containment units as massive forms pressed against transparent barriers, trying to catch sight of the source of the familiar call. "Krothvar!" The voice came from the nearest containment unit, speaking in accented, standard galactic. "Krothvar has returned." More voices took up the call, and soon the entire facility was echoing with the joyful chaos of a pack reunion. Krothvar was moving before Sarah could stop him, running toward the containment units with the fluid grace of an apex predator who had found his purpose. "Wait!" Theclon called after him. "The containment protocols. We can't just release." "Try to stop him," Sarah said grimly, following at a run. "I dare you." The scene at the first containment unit made Sarah's heart soar and break at the same time. Through the transparent barrier, she could see a Valdorian who was clearly older than Krothvar, his midnight scales marked with silver streaks. The elder's eyes were fixed on Krothvar with an expression of pure relief and joy. "Last hunter," the elder said, pressing his hands against the barrier. "You have grown thin. Have the small claws fed you well?" "Elder Bone Singer," Krothvar replied, matching the gesture. "I have eaten, but my spirit has been hungry for the sight of pack family." "And the younglings?" Sarah asked quietly. "Where are the young ones?" The elder's expression darkened. "The Sky Metal hunters separated us. The younglings are in the small pens beyond the mountain ridge." They said adult specimens and juvenile specimens required different containment protocols. Sarah felt a cold fury building in her chest. Separating young social creatures from their adult caretakers was one of the most psychologically damaging things that could be done to an intelligent species. "Commander, I need transport to the juvenile facility. Now." "Dr. Chun, the juvenile containment area is classified. I don't have authorization." "Then get authorization, or explain to your superiors why their legal problems just got 10 times worse." While Theclon made increasingly frantic calls to his supervisors, Sarah worked with Krothvar to communicate with the captive Valdorians. What she learned made her more determined than ever to see the hegemony pay for what they had done. The facility held 41 adult Valdorians from 3 different packs, all captured during the same mining expansion operation. They had been held in isolation for over a year, given minimal nutrition and no social interaction beyond what they could manage by calling to each other through the barriers. Several had developed what Sarah recognized as symptoms of severe depression and social anxiety. Worst of all, they had been subjected to regular intelligence assessments designed to prove their non-sentient status. These consisted of simple puzzle-solving tests and response evaluations that completely ignored Valdorian cultural and social intelligence patterns. "They wanted us to be stupid," Elder Bone Singer explained as Sarah took notes on her recorder. The test givers would become angry when we solved their puzzles too quickly. So we learned to solve them slowly, to give wrong answers sometimes, to protect ourselves from their disappointment. They trained you to hide your intelligence, Sarah said, feeling sick. Yes, but we remembered who we were in the pack songs. We kept our true self alive in the stories we shared in the darkness. 3 hours later, after multiple heated conversations between Theclon and his increasingly agitated superiors, Sarah and Krothvar finally gained access to the juvenile facility. What they found there nearly broke both of their hearts. 22 young Valdorians, ranging in age from what Sarah guessed was the equivalent of toddlers to teenagers, were housed in individual containment units that were barely large enough for them to stand upright. The facility was quieter than the adult compound, and Sarah quickly realized why. The younglings had been chemically sedated to make them easier to manage. Whispertail, Krothvar breathed, moving to a unit that held the smallest of the captives. The young Valdorian was curled in the corner of her containment area, so still that Sarah feared the worst until she saw the shallow rise and fall of breathing. Is she? Sarah couldn't finish the question. Alive, but diminished. Krothvar's voice carried a note of rage that made Sarah step back involuntarily. They have drugged her spirit to sleep. Sarah turned to face the facility's chief administrator, a nervous Centaurian scientist who had been following their inspection with increasing anxiety. What compounds are you using for sedation? Standard Xenofauna management protocols, the administrator replied. The juvenile specimens were displaying aggressive behavior and separation anxiety that made proper care difficult. Separation anxiety? Sarah's voice rose to a shout. They're children who have been torn away from their families and locked in cages. Of course they're anxious. She activated her communicator and began recording. This is Dr. Sarah Chun, Xenolaw advocate, documenting systematic abuse of sentient juveniles at Hegemony Preservation Facility Kepler, 442b. Current observations include chemical restraint of healthy young individuals, isolation containment protocols that violate every standard of care for social species, and deliberate separation of family units. Dr. Chun, please, the administrator said nervously. You're mischaracterizing our care protocols. These specimens receive regular nutrition, medical monitoring, and environmental enrichment. Environmental enrichment? Krothvar's voice was a growl that made the walls vibrate. You mean the colored lights and recorded nature, sounds that you think will replace the sight of sky and the scent of growing things? Sarah moved to Whispertail's containment unit and placed her hand against the barrier. The young Valdorian's eyes opened slowly, unfocused from the sedation, but still aware enough to recognize that someone new was present. Hello, little one, Sarah said softly. My name is Sarah. I'm a friend of Krothvar. At the sound of the familiar name, Whispertail's eyes widened, and she struggled to sit up. Krothvar, she whispered in a voice so quiet Sarah could barely hear it. Is the last hunter really here? I am here, little sister, Krothvar said, kneeling beside Sarah. And I have come to take you home. The transformation in Whispertail was immediate. Despite the sedatives in her system, she managed to crawl to the barrier and press her small hands against it. Home to Bone Valley? To the Singing Mountains? Home to wherever the pack chooses to make their hunting grounds, Krothvar replied. We are free now, little sister. The Small Claws have learned that we are people, not beasts. Similar scenes played out throughout the juvenile facility as news of Krothvar's arrival spread. Young Valdorians who had been listless and withdrawn suddenly came alive, calling out to their returned protector and asking questions about family members they had been separated from. Sarah documented everything, building an unshakable legal case while her heart broke for the suffering these children had endured. But she also felt a fierce satisfaction as she watched the facility administrators' growing panic. They knew they were looking at the end of their careers and quite possibly criminal charges. By the time they returned to the main facility, the situation had evolved into something approaching chaos. Commander Theclon met them at the landing pad with the expression of someone who had just received the worst possible news from his superiors. "Dr. Chun," he said, his voice tight with controlled desperation. "The Hegemony Mining Authority is prepared to offer a comprehensive settlement package. Full relocation of all Valdorian individuals to a protected world of their choosing, financial compensation, and recognition of their sentient status." "And their homeworld?" Sarah asked. "The mining operation can be scaled back. Certain areas can be designated as protected territories." "No." The voice belonged to Elder Bone Singer, who had somehow convinced the facility staff to allow him to join the negotiations. "No scaling back. No protected territories. The Sky Metal Hunters will leave Bone Valley completely, where there will be no peace between our peoples." Theclon looked helplessly between Sarah and the Elder. "The infrastructure costs alone are less than the legal penalties you'll face if this goes to trial," Sarah interrupted. "Commander, let me explain your situation in terms your corporate masters will understand. You have systematically abused 63 sentient beings, including 22 children, for over a year. You have stolen their homeworld through fraudulent classification. And now the entire galaxy is watching to see how you respond to being caught." She activated her communicator and displayed a holographic feed showing news coverage from across known space. The story of Krothvar's intelligence revelation and the discovery of the preservation facilities was dominating headlines on dozens of worlds. "Your stock price has already dropped 30% since the story broke," Sarah continued. "Mining rights on 12 different worlds are being reviewed by local governments. And 3 of your major investors have announced they're divesting from hegemony operations. You can settle this now and limit the damage, or you can fight it and watch your entire corporation collapse." Krothvar stepped forward, and Sarah noticed that every other Valdorian in sight had moved to stand behind him. Even through the containment barriers, they presented a united front that spoke of pack loyalty and shared determination. "The Bone Valley Pack offers one chance for honor to the Sky Metal Hunters," he said formally. "Return our hunting grounds. Remove all mining equipment and structures. Pay compensation for our dead and the damage to our sacred sites. Do this, and we will remember that you chose to make things right." "And if we don't?" Theclon asked. Krothvar's smile showed far too many teeth. "Then the pack will remember that as well. And when we are strong again, when our younglings are grown and our numbers have recovered, we will visit every world where the hegemony operates. We will remind them what happens to those who cage children and steal the homes of the innocent." The threat was delivered with such calm certainty that Sarah saw several facility staff members step backward involuntarily. This wasn't bluster or empty posturing. This was an apex predator promising consequences for those who had harmed his pack. Commander Theclon's communicator buzzed with an incoming priority message. After reading it, he closed his eyes and seemed to age 10 years in as many seconds. "The Hegemony Board of Directors has authorized full compliance with your terms," he said quietly. "All Valdorians are to be immediately released to your custody, Dr. Chun. Mining operations on Bone Valley will be suspended within the week, and environmental remediation will begin as soon as our equipment is removed." Sarah felt a wave of triumph and relief wash over her. "And the compensation? To be negotiated through normal diplomatic channels once the Valdorians have established their provisional government." Krothvar tilted his head. "Provisional government?" Sarah grinned. "Congratulations, Krothvar. You're about to become the first Valdorian ambassador to the galactic community. And I think I know just the human who'd be honored to help you navigate interstellar politics." 3 months later, Sarah stood on a cliff overlooking the Bone Valley, watching as young Valdorians played in the crystal-clear streams while their elders worked to rebuild the sacred sites that the hegemony's mining equipment had damaged. The environmental remediation was ahead of schedule, and the first permanent structures of New Bone Valley were already taking shape. Krothvar approached from behind, moving as silently as always, but no longer attempting to mask his presence from his pack friend. In the past months, he had grown into his role as both pack leader and diplomatic representative with a natural grace that impressed even veteran galactic politicians. The small council meeting went well. Sarah asked, not turning from her contemplation of the valley. Very well. The Centaurian Trade Federation has agreed to recognize our territorial boundaries, and the Zephyrian Research Collective wants to establish a cultural exchange program. Krothvar settled beside her, his massive frame comfortable and relaxed in a way that would have been impossible during his captivity. But I think you already knew this since you helped design our negotiating strategy. Sarah smiled. I may have offered a few suggestions. You're a natural diplomat, Krothvar. Your people are lucky to have you. And we're lucky to have our pack friend who taught us that not all small claws see teeth and claws when they look at us. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Whispertail chase a group of slightly older younglings through the shallow water. The little Valdorian had recovered completely from her time in captivity, and her laughter rang across the valley like music. Sarah, Krothvar said eventually, the pack has been discussing something important. Oh, we want to offer you a place in the pack. Not as a visitor or honored guest, but as true family. Whispertail calls you Small Mother now, and the elders speak of your courage in the old stories. Sarah felt her eyes fill with tears. Krothvar, you don't have to answer now, he said gently. But know that there will always be a place for you in the Bone Valley for as long as the pack endures. Sarah wiped her eyes and looked out over the valley where children played and families worked together to rebuild their world. She thought about her small apartment on Station Omega 7, her respectable but lonely career studying dangerous creatures that most people prefer to keep safely caged. Then, she looked at her pack friend, the galaxy's most dangerous predator who had become her closest companion and trusted ally. I think, she said slowly, that I'd like to learn more about being part of a pack. Krothvar's answering smile could have lit the entire valley. Then welcome home, pack sister Sarah. Welcome to where you belong. As the sun set over the Bone Valley, Sarah Chun realized that she had accomplished something far more important than taming the galaxy's top predator. She had found her family among the stars, and discovered that the most dangerous creatures in the universe were often just people looking for someone brave enough to see past their claws and scales to the hearts beating underneath. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would she.